A benchtop supply is an instrument that lets you generate a particular voltage or current in order to power your circuit. As an example, for this particular bench supply here, this is a 3-channel instrument. So this means that there are 3 independent channels that can be used as kind of standalone power supplies. So the way that this particular machine works is that when I turn it on, I'm initially setting up what will be the voltage and current limit for each of my channels. So channel 1 at the moment is set to 5.8 volts, so it will generate 5.8 volts as its supply. And I change that using the knobs over here. So by adjusting under channel 1, I can change what the voltage will actually be, and similarly for current. So the current here is really a limit. So it says this would supply 6.7 volts and a maximum of 1.23 amps of current. And then similarly for channel 2, I can independently set the settings for that. Now, one thing to be aware of for this type of bench supply is that there are settings for series, parallel, or independent. So pretty much always right now what you want is for 2 independent channels, which means that reading off this key here that both of these channels, both of these buttons should be pushed out. So you kind of toggle them in, toggle them out. So if you don't understand what the difference is at the moment, you want this to be independent. And then if you wanted your 2 channels, 2 separate voltage supplies to be in series with each other, then you configure it like this, or if you want them to be in parallel, then you configure it like that. So on this machine, in order to actually start generating some power, I then press the on-off button here. And so you see this is now lit up, and that indicates that it's now supplying power out through these pins down the bottom here. And so I can read right now there will be 6.7 volts on channel 1. It's labeled here, channel 1. Right now 0 amps is flowing, and there would be 7 volts on channel 2, that's over here, and again 0 amps is flowing. Channel 3 is always 5 volts, so it's just hard-coded fixed to be 5 volts, so that's channel 3 over here. Now to connect to these, you can use banana plugs that look like this, which just plug straight in. And so these are nice because you can kind of daisy chain them. So if you have another one, you can keep connecting if you need to do that. Or you can use alligator clips, basically like this. And as an example here, I've got a little bulb, incandescent bulb, which is rated for 6 volts. So I'm just going to turn that voltage down. I'm going to turn off the output while I'm fiddling around. And now I will connect to channel 1, the positive and negative terminals. And then when I turn on the output, you see now my light will glow. You can, of course, adjust the voltage while you have the output being generated, or you can turn it off and then change the settings to what you want, and then turn it back on like that. Now, one thing that catches people out sometimes is that there's a pin here which is labeled as ground. And so this can be a little confusing. So what that ground pin actually means is it's basically connected to the ground pin on your power socket. So this will go to the earth of your building's power supply, and there'll be like a metal stake driven into the soil, which will provide a ground reference for the building. And so this particular pin here would enable you to connect to that if you want to have that ground reference. If you just want to use it as a plain DC power supply, then the pins that you want are the plus and minus for each of your channels. So notice, for example, if I actually go and connect this over here to ground, nothing will happen. It's actually not going to work. So I need that plus and minus there as my connection. So that's one type of power supply. You might also have a different model, so I'll just turn this one off and I'll show you another kind of power supply that you might also come across. So slightly different model. This is obviously a slightly older machine. And the way that this works, if I turn it on, I have controls here for my 2 different channels, and so these current and voltage knobs correspond to these pins here, and current voltage corresponds to this channel here. And then there is a fixed 5-volt supply over here. And I would know that this is 5 volts because it's labeled here at the top that this is a 5-volt 3-amp output, in addition to 2 by 0 to 30 volts. So these ones can actually be adjusted basically all the way to, well, actually a little bit above 30 volts in this particular case. Now, as far as setting a current limit on these, this knob here will adjust the current limit, but there's really no nice way to see what is the current limit of the system at the moment, because it doesn't have an on-off for the output. So if you want to know what the current limit is, then what you actually need to do is just connect a wire that shorts those pins together. So I've just taken one wire and just plugged it in from positive to negative. And you can see at this moment that there is, so 1.5 amps is flowing through this wire. And the voltage which is needed to achieve that is quite small, 0.3 volts. So if I would like to set a particular current limit for my circuit, let's suppose I want a maximum of 0.5 amp, to be allowed to flow through my circuit, then I would adjust to 0.5 amp. I'll then disconnect, and now I don't touch this knob anymore because I've already set that to that 0.5 amp setting. So I can then dial in the voltage that I want, so I select whatever voltage is required, and now I'm ready to go and use this particular channel. If you want to disable the output, if you want to, say, rewire your circuit without there being any power flowing, you have to turn off the entire instrument. So I turn it back on again, and the same settings as before will still be there because it's the amount of turning of these knobs has actually not been changed. Again, there are independent series and parallel options based on pressing these buttons. If you're not sure which one you want, then it is independent at this stage. Later on, you might experiment with setting up different types of dual power supplies, for example, but at this stage, the mode that you want is independent. So just make sure that these buttons line up with the particular settings that you have here.